I've forgiven drunkards, liars, and even the man who tried to rob me at gunpoint in '83. But there's one person I'll never forgive: my own brother. Dennis. He didn't just betray me. He sold me. My name is Shirley Nelson, and I'm 75 years old. I live alone now, in a modest house tucked behind a row of maple trees in Princeton, New Jersey. Most people around here know me as the retired writer who feeds the birds and volunteers at the women's shelter twice a week. They see my gray curls, my steady hands, and they smile at the kindness in my eyes. But they don't know the shadow I've lived with. They don't see the scars because some wounds don't bleed. They whisper, and mine have been whispering for 61 years. I've thought 1,000 times about telling this story. I've gotten as far as opening a blank page, gripping my pen tight enough to turn my knuckles white. But then, I'd feel his name on my tongue, Dennis, and the air would thicken like fog in my chest. I'd shut the notebook. I'd tell myself, not yet, not today. But time has a cruel way of reminding us that someday doesn't wait forever. A few months ago, I found a lump near my collarbone. I figured it was nothing, probably just a swollen gland from the cold. But then came the fatigue, the weight loss, the cough that rattled my ribs at night. The doctor was gentle when he told me stage 3 lymphoma, and given my age, treatments might not buy me much. He asked if there was anyone I'd like to notify. I told him no, but that wasn't entirely true. There is someone I owe the truth to, me. I owe myself the truth. After all these years of silence, I deserve to say out loud what happened to me, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, just as a woman who lived, endured, and chose not to be buried by the pain. So here it is, my story. I was born in 1949, the second child of Walter and Helen Nelson, in a small farmhouse just outside of Princeton. My brother Dennis was 5 years older than me. He had sandy blonde hair and a laugh that echoed through the barn like a summer breeze. After our mother died of pneumonia when I was 9, Dennis became my world. My father, well, he became something else entirely. Bitter, mean, and drunk more often than not. Dennis was the one who'd sneak me extra biscuits when I was hungry. He'd fix my braids when I couldn't reach the back of my head. When thunder shook the windows, it was his hand I clung to. I trusted him in the way only a little sister can blindly and completely. Looking back, I think that trust was what broke me most. After Dad passed away in 1962 when I was just 13, we were left with nothing but debt and each other. Dennis was only 18 then, but he carried the weight of the world on his back. He dropped out of school and picked up odd jobs fixing fences, sweeping out barns, even hauling ice in the summer. I remember watching his hands crack open in the winter from the cold. We were poor, but he always said he'd take care of me. I believed him. That winter was especially cruel. We ran out of oil for the furnace more than once. I remember sleeping in my coat, curled up under 3 blankets. Dennis barely spoke that month, always out, always tense. Then, one night, he came home with a strange glint in his eyes. He told me he'd found an opportunity for me work, real work. A wealthy couple in Newark needed a young helper to assist with housekeeping and childcare. They'd provide a room, meals, and pay. He made it sound like a dream. And to a poor, motherless girl who wanted to help her only family. It was. I packed my things the next morning. Just a little satchel with my Sunday dress, 2 pairs of socks, and the only photograph I had of our mother. Dennis drove me in silence. I remember his hands shaking on the steering wheel. I asked him if everything would be okay. He didn't answer. We arrived at a brick house with no porch light and boarded up windows. That should have been the first red flag. But I was naive. I was 13. I trusted him. He knocked. A man opened the door. I don't remember his face, just the smell of cigar smoke and the sound of the lock clicking behind me. I never saw Dennis again. That's where the real story begins. Before everything fell apart, before the lies and the betrayal, Dennis Nelson was my whole world. Growing up in the countryside just outside Princeton, New Jersey, our lives were simple. We didn't have much, but back then, I thought we had enough. Our house was old, with chipped paint and a roof that whistled in the wind, but it sat on a patch of land where the grass grew tall and wildflowers bloomed in spring. There was a swing hanging from the big elm tree out back. Dennis made it for me when I was 6. I can still feel the rough rope in my hands, still hear his voice shouting, "Higher, Shirley, you're flying." Our mother, Helen, was a gentle soul. She hummed when she cooked, braided my hair every morning before school, and made sure we said grace before dinner, even if all we had was cornbread and beans. She had tired eyes, but her smile lit up the whole room. When she got sick during the winter of 1958, I didn't understand how serious it was. She kept smiling, even when the coughing got so bad she couldn't finish a sentence. She died just 2 weeks after Christmas. I was 9. Everything dimmed after that. Dad Walter Nelson was a man broken in ways I couldn't comprehend at the time. He'd never been warm, not like Mom. After she passed, he turned cold, harsh. The bottle became his closest companion, and Dennis and I learned how to read his moods by the sound of his footsteps. If his boots hit the porch heavy and slow, we knew to stay quiet. If they stumbled, we hid. Dennis was 14 when Mom died. I don't think he ever had time to grieve. He just took over. He made my lunch, walked me to school when Dad forgot, and even stitched the hem on my Sunday dress one night with bloody fingers from working the barbed wire fence all day. I remember one time, during a thunderstorm, the power went out. I was so scared I couldn't stop crying. Dennis lit a candle and sat beside my bed, reading aloud from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. He didn't stop until the storm did. His voice made me feel safe, strong. That night, I whispered to him, "You're like Mama now." He didn't answer, but the way he held my hand said everything. We didn't have friends coming around much. Dad wouldn't allow it. He didn't trust anyone. And I think part of him didn't want anyone to see how bad things had gotten. Dennis had to grow up fast. Too fast. By the time he was 16, he was doing a man's work, hauling hay, fixing machinery, taking jobs in town no one else wanted. I used to watch him walk out in the early morning, shoulders hunched under the weight of responsibility no boy should have carried. Sometimes he came home with bruises. He never said a word about them, but through it all, he was good to me. I believed in the deepest part of my soul that Dennis would never let anything happen to me. I believed that even when Dad's anger turned into fists, he started hitting Dennis first. I remember the first time it happened. Dad had lost his job at the mill and came home roaring. Dennis had used the last of the bread to make me lunch. And when Dad found out, he lashed out. I heard the thud and ran to the kitchen, just in time to see Dennis pick himself up off the floor. He didn't fight back. He just looked at Dad and said, "Don't touch her, ever." From that day on, Dennis became my shield. Every time Dad got angry, he made sure to stand between me and the danger. He kept me safe. That was the version of Dennis I knew and loved. But I see now he was still a child, too. When I turned 12, the cracks in our world deepened. Dad's drinking got worse. He'd disappear for days, and when he was home, the house was full of tension. Dennis talked less. He looked tired all the time, as if every breath hurt. The money was running out. The barn roof leaked. Our clothes were patched too many times to hold stitches anymore. Still, Dennis never complained, not once. On my 13th birthday, he gave me a gift, a paperback copy of Little Women, used and frayed at the edges. He said he'd traded an afternoon's work cleaning out a neighbor's chicken coop to get it for me. I hugged that book like it was made of gold. I still have it. The corners are torn now, but on the inside cover, he wrote, "To Shirley, my little sister, my bright star, never stop reading, never stop dreaming." I don't know if he meant it when he wrote that. I like to think he did. That's the hardest part, remembering who he was before. The boy who fixed my swing and sang lullabies during storms. The boy who made me feel safe in a world that was falling apart. Because when everything changed, when he made that choice, it shattered not only my body, but everything I believed about love, family, and trust. And yet, here I am, still remembering the boy he once was, while never forgetting what he became. The winter I turned 14 was the coldest I remember. Our furnace broke down for the third time in December, and the draft coming through the windows cut through our coats like ice. I used to wake up with frost on the inside of my bedroom window. My fingers cracked from the cold, and Dennis's boots had holes in both soles. We were surviving on powdered milk and canned peaches. I could see the weight of our situation on Dennis's face more and more each day. He barely spoke. He'd started coming home late, later than usual. Sometimes he reeked of cigarette smoke, not the kind our father used to light, but harsher, more chemical. I didn't question it. I was too busy trying to keep my grades up and make sure we had something warm to eat at night, even if that meant boiling the same potatoes 3 days in a row. One night, just before Christmas, Dennis came home with red cheeks and snow in his hair. He had this strange energy, nervous, like he was rehearsing something in his head. He didn't take off his coat. Instead, he stood in the kitchen and said, "Shirley, I've found a way out." I stopped stirring the watery soup I was making and looked up, a way out of what he glanced toward the living room, as if expecting our late father to come stumbling out drunk, even though he'd been gone nearly a year. "There's this man," he said slowly, "Frank Mathers, owns some properties in Newark. He knows a family, real nice folks who need help with their baby. They're offering room, board, and $10 a week. $10 a week to a 14-year-old girl in 1963 that sounded like a fortune. I remember blinking, trying to imagine what $10 could buy. I thought of warm gloves, a full breakfast, maybe even my own pair of shoes. You'd be working in their home." Dennis continued, "Light chores, a little babysitting. They'll treat you right, and you won't be freezing here." I remember nodding because the way he said it made it sound like he was doing me a favor, like this was an act of love. When would I leave? He hesitated, then said, "Tomorrow." It was fast, too fast, but I didn't question it. I trusted him. Still, even then, that night, I packed what little I had into a brown satchel, 2 blouses, 1 skirt, my nightgown, and the paperback of Little Women he'd given me. I tucked the photo of Mom in between the pages. She was young in that photo, her smile framed by waves of dark hair, holding Dennis when he was still a toddler. I didn't sleep. My stomach churned with both excitement and dread. I told myself it was just nerves. I was going on an adventure, after all, a chance to help my brother, to help us. The next morning, Dennis walked me out to the truck. The sun had barely risen, and everything was covered in a soft layer of snow. He didn't say much during the drive, just tapped the steering wheel and kept his eyes fixed on the road. I kept glancing over at him, wondering why his hands were trembling. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah, just tired." We reached Newark just after 8. The city felt so different from Princeton, louder, grayer. The streets were lined with narrow houses, most of them with cracked steps or rusted gates. He pulled up in front of a building with faded green shutters and a broken mailbox hanging by one screw. The curtains were drawn tight, even in daylight. "This is it?" I asked. Dennis nodded. "Yeah, they're nice folks. Real private." I looked around, waiting for someone to come out and greet us, but no one did. Then the front door opened. A man in a dark wool coat stood there, tall and stocky, with a face that seemed carved out of stone. He didn't smile. His eyes darted to me, then back to Dennis. He gave a curt nod. "Frank," Dennis said under his breath. They didn't shake hands. Instead, Frank turned and walked back into the house without saying a word. I hesitated. My instincts whispered something was off, but Dennis touched my arm gently and said, "Go on, Shirley. It's okay." I stepped through the doorway. The smell hit me first, old smoke, must, and something metallic I couldn't place. The inside of the house was dark, even though the sun was shining outside. The curtains were thick, almost like blackout drapes. I heard footsteps upstairs, heavy ones, and the distant sound of a door closing. When I turned around, Dennis was already back at the truck. He didn't wave. He didn't wait. He just drove away. I stood there in the silence, still holding my satchel, my heart pounding like a drum. I wanted to run after him, to shout, "Wait, you forgot something," but somewhere deep in my chest, I knew he didn't forget me. He left me. Frank returned to the hallway, looked me up and down, and said, "You'll sleep in the back room. No noise, no questions." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My throat closed up. The door locked behind me with a click, and just like that, my life was no longer my own. The room they put me in had no windows. It was cold and smelled like mildew. The walls were bare, painted the color of stale bread, and the only furniture was a narrow bed with a stained mattress and a wooden chair missing one leg. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, swinging slightly, as if someone had bumped it just moments before I arrived. It flickered when I turned it on. I remember standing there in the middle of that room, still clutching my satchel, trying to understand what was happening. I waited for someone to explain, waited for the nice couple Dennis had mentioned, waited for someone to smile and show me the baby I was supposed to care for, but no one came. Instead, the door shut behind me with a heavy clunk. I didn't even notice the lock until I tried to open it later. From the inside, there was no knob, just a flat panel. My heart sank so deep into my stomach I thought I'd be sick. I wasn't a guest. I was a prisoner. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to footsteps upstairs, laughter, then yelling, then a silence so complete it screamed. Every sound made my skin prickle. I kept telling myself Dennis would come back, that maybe he didn't understand what this place really was, but he never did. Hours passed. The bulb buzzed above me. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I woke up to the sound of the door unlocking. The man Frank Mathers stood there, holding a tray with what looked like scrambled eggs and toast. Behind him, another man watched, arms folded. He had thick eyebrows and eyes that never blinked. Frank set the tray on the chair and said in a voice like gravel, "You eat when we say. You speak when spoken to. Try to leave and you'll regret it." I didn't say a word. My throat felt too tight. "You understand?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Good girl." And with that, the door closed again. That's how it started. At first, they fed me, kept me mostly alone. Days passed, maybe a week, maybe more. Time didn't feel real anymore. I lost track of it inside that room. There was no light to mark morning or night. I ate when they said, used the bathroom when they allowed. I wasn't allowed to bathe without someone standing outside the door. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing while I cried. Then came the night it all changed. I was half asleep, clutching Little Women like it could protect me, when the door creaked open and didn't close right away. Frank walked in. Behind him were two other men I hadn't seen before. One of them was wearing a coat that smelled like gasoline. The other had a gold ring on his thumb that caught the light when he reached for me. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. I tried to scream. I tried to fight. But I was just a girl, a terrified, hungry girl, and they were grown men. I was nothing to them, a transaction, a thing. When it was over, I curled into a ball and bled onto the mattress. I prayed to God to take me in my sleep, but I woke up the next morning still breathing. That became the pattern. Days of silence, nights of horror. Sometimes it was just Frank. Other times it was someone else. Strangers came and went. None of them looked me in the eye. They changed my clothes, forced me to wear things I didn't recognize as my own. Once, Frank threw my satchel away. I watched him toss it into a garbage bag along with my shoes and the photo of my mother. I lunged for it, but he slapped me so hard I saw stars. "You don't need memories." He spat. "You belong here now." That was the moment something inside me cracked, not just from the violence, but from the erasure. They weren't just hurting me. They were trying to erase who I was. But I clung to what little I had left. In my mind, I replayed my mother's lullabies. I recited lines from Little Women, even though I could no longer hold the book. I whispered my name to myself at night, Shirley Nelson, just so I wouldn't forget it. I began to talk to the cracks in the wall. I imagined them as tiny windows, and I'd whisper through them as if someone out there might be listening, might come for me, might care, but no one came. No one even knew I was missing, because Dennis hadn't just handed me over. He had erased me, lied about where I went. I learned later that he told neighbors I'd gone to live with a distant aunt in upstate New York. No one checked. No one asked. He'd made it easy for them to forget me, but I wouldn't forget him. Even as they hurt me, even as I cried and begged God to take me, there was a flame inside me that refused to go out. It was small, flickering, but it was mine. I told myself, if I ever get out of here, I will never let them silence me again. I didn't know how I'd survive. I didn't know if I'd ever be free. But I made a vow in that windowless room. Between sobs and bruises, they will not break me. Not completely. I tried to escape once. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was naive, but when you've been trapped in darkness for so long, even the faintest crack of light feels like a promise. It happened on a Wednesday. I only remember that because the man who usually came on Wednesdays didn't show. Frank had been gone most of the afternoon, and the house was unusually quiet. I hadn't seen the others since the night before, and for once, I was left alone for hours. I don't know what changed. Maybe they got careless. Maybe they thought I'd been broken enough to stop trying. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. The first thing I did was check the door, still locked, as always. But I'd learned how the latch sounded, how it clicked softly when it wasn't secured properly. I had a bobby pin I'd managed to hide in my bra strap. It had fallen off one of the cheap wigs they made me wear sometimes, and I'd kept it like a sacred relic. My hands trembled as I worked at the lock. I'd seen it done in movies, but I had no idea what I was really doing. Still, something inside me wouldn't quit. I jiggled the pin, turned it just so, and then click. I froze. It was open. I pulled the door slowly, half expecting sirens to blare or someone to tackle me from behind, but there was only silence. I crept into the hallway barefoot, afraid my footsteps would give me away. The house felt hollow, like it had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. The curtains were still drawn tight, casting everything in a sickly orange glow from the streetlights outside. I found the kitchen. The back door was bolted, but the window above the sink was cracked open just enough to let in a whisper of air. I dragged a chair over. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure someone could hear it down the block. I climbed up, shoved the window farther open, and started to climb out. That's when I heard the voice. "Where do you think you're going, sweetheart?" It was Tommy, the one with the gold ring and the dead eyes. He stepped out from the shadows by the pantry, a sick smile spreading across his face. I froze. My knees went weak. I just needed air. I stammered, the lie ridiculous even to my own ears. He grabbed my arm and yanked me down so hard I hit the floor. My chin slammed into the linoleum. Everything blurred. Blood filled my mouth. "You think you can run after everything we've given you." He dragged me back to the room like I was nothing, like a rag doll. I kicked. I screamed. He only laughed. That night was worse than any before, not because of what they did to me, but because after, when I lay curled in a corner, bleeding and shaking, Frank came in. He knelt beside me, pulled out a wad of crumpled bills from his coat pocket, and tossed them onto the bed. "That's from your brother," he said coldly. "Just sent the last payment." My mouth went dry. "What?" He smiled, not kindly. $300. That's all you were worth to him. Said he'd rather take care of himself than drag around some useless little girl. Guess he made the right call. I didn't breathe. I didn't cry. I just went quiet, because in that moment, something worse than pain settled in my chest. Truth. Dennis hadn't just given me away. He'd sold me. He'd taken money. He'd looked at me, his baby sister, the girl he used to carry on his back and sing lullabies to, and decided I was worth a few $100s and a clean break. That knowledge shattered me more than fists ever could. I spent the next days in silence. I refused food. I stopped crying. Whatever part of me still believed in goodness, still clung to hope, curled up and went to sleep. But deep down, I started to plan. I knew no one was coming to save me. If I ever got out, it would be because I found a way. And I would carry the truth of Dennis with me, not as a wound, but as a weapon, because the worst betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the ones who once held your hand. I don't know how many more days passed after I learned the truth about Dennis. Time lost its shape inside that room. The light bulb burned out eventually, and no one replaced it. I stayed in the dark, half starved, half mad, surviving on dry toast and tap water. I no longer cried. Something inside me had turned to stone, but just when I thought the world had forgotten I existed, someone noticed. It started with a voice. A woman's voice, muffled, distant, coming from somewhere outside my prison. I couldn't make out the words, but it was soft and steady, like the hum of my mother's lullabies. I pressed my ear to the wall. The voice belonged to someone who lived nearby. She spoke to a dog sometimes I'd hear her call. Come on, Henry with a warm chuckle. Her kindness seeped through the drywall, and it stirred something in me I thought was long dead. Her name was Eleanor Brewster, a retired librarian, 72 years old, with sharp eyes behind thick glasses and a habit of noticing things others missed. She lived in the house across the narrow alleyway, and she noticed that the men in Frank's house never took out trash, never opened the blinds, never came out during the day unless it was to smoke on the back porch. She noticed that strange men came and went at odd hours, and then she noticed something that made her pause. She saw a flicker of movement behind one of the heavy curtains, a shadow small, too small to be any of the men. That shadow was me. It was the one night I had enough strength to peek through the edge of the curtain. Just a crack, just for air, and by sheer miracle. Eleanor happened to be outside feeding her cat. She didn't look away. She didn't shrug it off. She picked up the phone. I found out later that she called the police twice that week. The first time, they told her there was no reason for concern. The second time, she insisted, said she was willing to sign a sworn statement. And then, one afternoon, they came. I was dozing on the mattress. My body curled in on itself. When I heard the commotion, voices outside, a knock, then another, louder this time. Newark Police Department opened the door. My heart leapt. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. The door to my room burst open and Frank shoved his head in. He hissed, "You stay quiet." Not a sound. I nodded slowly, but inside I was screaming. Then came the sound I'd waited nearly a year to hear wood splintering, the front door being broken open, shouting, a struggle, furniture crashing, and then heavy boots running down the hallway toward me. My door opened again, but this time, it wasn't Frank. It was a uniformed officer, young, wide-eyed, and shocked. His flashlight swept the room, and then it landed on me. I was sitting on the floor, arms around my knees, barely 80 pounds and shaking like a leaf. He lowered the light. "Miss, you're safe now." Safe? I wanted to believe it. I wanted to stand and collapse into his arms, to weep, to scream. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The words just wouldn't come. The officer knelt, draped his jacket over my shoulders, and radioed for a medic. 2 more officers appeared behind him. One of them gasped under his breath. I remember thinking how strange it was that they looked more scared of me than I was of them. They carried me out. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt air that wasn't stale or sour. The cold hit me like a blessing. I saw sky again, gray and heavy, but beautiful beyond words. And then I saw her. Eleanor Brewster stood at the edge of the yellow tape, clutching her cat to her chest. Her eyes locked on mine. She didn't say a word. She just nodded, as if to tell me, "I saw you. I believed you were there. I fought for you." That night, I was taken to the Trenton Memorial Hospital. They cleaned my wounds, fed me warm broth, and let me sleep under clean sheets. 2 detectives came in later. One of them asked, gently, if I knew my name. It took a moment, But then I whispered, Shirley, Shirley Nelson. Saying it out loud was like breathing for the first time. I stayed at the hospital for a few days. They ran tests, stitched old wounds, and checked for infections. The nurses were kind. One of them braided my hair and brought me a new copy of Little Women. When they transferred me to the Trenton Children's Shelter, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because for the first time, I had a reason to believe life might go on. Eleanor came to visit me once. She brought ginger cookies in a tin and sat beside me in the courtyard. We didn't talk much. I didn't know how. Before she left, she took my hand and said, "You held on. That's more than most could have done. You're a fighter, sweetheart." I don't remember if I said thank you. I hope I did, because if there's one person who saved me more than anyone, it was Eleanor Brewster. She saw the shadow in the window, and she refused to look away. The Trenton Children's Shelter wasn't a cheerful place, but it wasn't a cage. That alone made it feel like freedom. My room was small, but it had a window. The first morning I woke up there, sunlight spilled across the floor like gold, and I sat there just watching it for what must have been an hour. A nurse walked by and asked if I was okay. I didn't know how to explain that I hadn't seen sunlight on my own skin in almost a year. That something as simple as a curtain being open made my heart tremble. The staff did their best, but I could see it in their faces. They didn't know what to do with a girl like me. I was quiet, jumpy, barely spoke. I flinched when anyone walked too fast or closed a door too hard. Some of the other girls avoided me. Others stared. I didn't blame them. I didn't even recognize myself. Then one afternoon, everything shifted because she walked into my life, Miss Rachel Whitmore. She wasn't like the others. She didn't wear scrubs or carry clipboards. She had soft gray hair pulled into a bun, glasses with rose-tinted rims, and a cardigan that smelled faintly of chamomile tea. She was a volunteer, reading tutor, an old retired English teacher who came in 3 days a week to work with quiet kids. Naturally, they paired her with me. At first, I thought she'd give up, like so many others had. She didn't. She sat beside me in the library, sliding a well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web across the table. "I know it's a children's book," she said gently, "but it has more truth in it than most grown-up novels. Let's read it together. You don't have to speak, just sit." So I sat. The first time, I barely looked up. She read aloud, slowly, with rhythm, letting the story breathe. She didn't ask questions or watch my reactions. She just read. The second time, I turned the pages for her. The third time, I whispered the last word of every sentence with her. By the second week, I was reading aloud. It felt strange at first, like my voice didn't belong to me anymore, like it was something I had to borrow. But Miss Whitmore smiled with every word I said, like each one was a victory. She never asked me what had happened. She never once said, "Tell me your story." She knew better than that. Instead, she gave me stories to climb inside. One day, she placed a spiral notebook in front of me, blank, brand new. "This is yours," she said. "Write whatever you want, not for anyone else, just for you." I stared at the first page for an hour. Then, with shaking hands, I wrote, "My name is Shirley Nelson." I filled 10 pages that day. Not with the full truth, not yet, but with pieces, memories of Mom's voice, of the swing Dennis made, of how the wind sounded through the elm tree behind our house in Princeton. I wrote poems without rhyme and little letters to God I never intended to send. It was the beginning of something I didn't even know I needed. Healing didn't happen all at once. There were nights I still woke up screaming. There were moments when someone touched my arm and I'd flinch so violently it scared us both. But through it all, Miss Whitmore stayed. She brought me books, tea, and once a scarf she knitted in my favorite color after I said I liked the one she wore. She told me I had a writer's mind, that I saw things others missed. I clung to her words the way I used to cling to Dennis's hand when I was small. She helped me understand that I didn't have to erase the girl I used to be in order to become someone new, that I could carry both pain and strength in the same body, that I was more than what had been done to me. By spring, I had written 3 notebooks full of poems, short stories, and memories. Miss Whitmore read every page. She said my words could one day help others find their own. And I believed her, because by then, I had started to believe in me again. By the time I turned 16, I no longer looked like the scared, hollow-eyed girl who'd been pulled from that dark house in Newark. But I still carried her inside me. That girl, the one who had whispered her name to the cracks in the wall, the one who refused to forget who she was, she never left me. She became the reason I kept going. When I was finally placed with a foster family in Lawrenceville, just outside Trenton, I brought little with me, a paper bag of clothes, 3 spiral notebooks, and a copy of Little Women, held together with tape and hope. But inside me, I carried something much greater purpose. Miss Whitmore continued to visit me even after I left the shelter. She became something like family, though we never called it that aloud. I think she knew titles weren't important to someone like me. Loyalty was, she once said to me, pain carves out the places where truth can live. You have something to say, Shirley, and the world needs to hear it. I never forgot that. In high school, I threw myself into writing like it was oxygen. I joined the school paper, wrote short stories that made teachers cry and classmates uncomfortable. I was still shy, still cautious, but when I wrote, I was loud. By graduation, I had won 3 statewide contests and been offered a small scholarship to Rutgers University. I studied literature, slept with my journal under my pillow, and worked part-time shelving books at a used bookstore. Every spare moment, I wrote, but I didn't write about that house. Not yet. The first time I tried, I ended up tearing the pages out, hands shaking, heart racing. It would take years before I could tell that story fully. Instead, I started with fiction stories about brave girls and broken families and women who ran toward the fire, not away from it, but people recognized something underneath: rawness, honesty. By the time I turned 30, I had published my first novel. It wasn't about me. Not exactly, but it was about a girl who survived when no one came for her. It hit like a match to dry leaves. I received hundreds of letters from women, some older than me, some heartbreakingly young, who said my story gave them the courage to speak, or to leave, or to finally look themselves in the mirror and say, this wasn't my fault. I read every single one, and somewhere in the middle of all those words, I found my next mission. It started small, a support group in my apartment every Thursday night, coffee, cookies, and a safe space for women to talk or not talk, just to be. I didn't have any professional training, but I knew how to listen. I knew how to say, me too, and mean it. We grew. By the time I was 45, we had rented an office space. By 50, we had therapists, volunteers, lawyers, and even a little hotline. We called it the Safe Path Foundation, because that's what I never had, but what every woman deserves: a path to safety. A way out. We offered counseling, shelter referrals, advocacy, and what I think mattered most, hope. Real, tangible, reachable hope. And I didn't stop writing. I wrote memoirs, essays, gave speeches at schools and community centers. I looked into the faces of girls who were where I once was, and I told them, you are not your worst day. You are not what someone else did to you. You get to rewrite your story. At 60, I received a Community Leadership Award from the mayor of Princeton. When I stood at that podium, dressed in a navy suit I had bought with my first book advance, I looked out at the crowd and thought of that little windowless room, and of the girl who once thought her name would disappear if no one heard it again. Now, my name was in newspapers, on bookshelves, on plaques, but most importantly, it was in letters from women who said I helped them find theirs. Every time I felt doubt creep back in, I returned to those letters because they reminded me that surviving is not the end of the story. Helping someone else survive, that's when it truly begins. I never expected to see Dennis Nelson again. By the time I turned 70, he had become more myth than man in my mind, a shadow that lingered behind every joyful moment, behind every hard-earned triumph, the one ghost I hadn't laid to rest. Then, one rainy morning 2 years ago, I got a call from Camden General Hospital. A nurse introduced herself and said, "We're contacting you because you're listed as next of kin. Dennis Nelson is here, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He doesn't have much time." I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the quiet street where spring had barely begun to bloom. I hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in decades, not by anyone who knew what it meant to me. Did he ask for me? I whispered. There was a pause. Yes, he said if anyone should see him before the end, it should be you. I don't know why I went. Maybe because I needed answers. Maybe because, after all the strength I'd gathered across a lifetime, I wanted him to see what he didn't destroy. The hospital room was dim, with that faint antiseptic smell that clings to every surface. Dennis looked so small beneath the sheets, nothing like the boy I once adored, or the monster I'd spent years hating. His cheeks were sunken. His hair, once thick and golden, had turned to gray wisps. But I recognized his eyes. They fluttered open when he heard the door. His voice came out rough. "Shirley." I didn't speak. I just walked in slowly and sat down across from him, placing my handbag gently in my lap like I was visiting a stranger at a bus stop. "I didn't think you'd come," he murmured. I stared at him for a long time before saying, "Neither did I." He tried to smile, but it broke into a cough. When he caught his breath, he looked at me not with arrogance or indifference, but with something raw, human, weak. "I've seen your face in the paper," he said, "on the cover of your book. You've done good things." I waited. He swallowed. I wanted to say I'm sorry. That word, sorry. It landed like a stone between us. Why I asked. My voice was quiet, steady. His eyes welled up. Because I was a coward. Because I thought if I got rid of you, I could finally be free. Free of what I said. The bitterness creeping into my tone. Of your own guilt, of responsibility. He nodded, ashamed. I thought I'd bury what happened, pretend I never had a sister. But you lived, and you became something I never deserved to be near. I felt my hands tremble, not with rage, not even with sadness, with grief. Grief for the brother I lost long before he sold me. I trusted you, I whispered. You were the last person I trusted. Dennis cried then, the kind of weeping that doesn't ask for forgiveness, just release. It wasn't enough. It never would be, but I didn't walk out. I sat with him until the nurse came in to check his vitals. He fell asleep not long after. His breathing grew shallow, labored. I never saw him again. He died 2 days later. No funeral, no family. The hospital cremated his body and sent a note offering to forward the ashes. I declined. I didn't need them. That room, those last words were closure enough. He didn't deserve peace, but I did. And I left that hospital not with a burden, but with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt since I was 14. He didn't get to define my story. I did. I'm 75 now. I wake up each morning to the birds outside my kitchen window, brew a cup of black coffee, and sit at the old oak desk where I've written every one of my books. My body moves slower these days, but my mind is sharp and my heart, somehow, is still open. There are still moments when the memories knock on the back door of my mind. The cold room, the locked door, the betrayal, but I don't let them take up residence anymore. They're visitors, not residents. They no longer control the story. I do. I've spent most of my adult life helping women and girls find their voices. Some of them escaped just in time. Some endured years of pain before breaking free. And some never got the chance. I carry their names with me like prayers. The truth is, we don't always get to choose what happens to us, but we do get to choose what we become afterward. I became a writer, an advocate, a survivor. But more than that, I became someone who forgave herself for not escaping sooner, for not seeing the betrayal coming, for being a child who loved too deeply and trusted too completely. And to anyone listening now, maybe you're sitting in a quiet room. Maybe you're older, like me. Maybe you've spent decades carrying something no one else could see. I want to say this. You are not what they did to you. You are not what you had to do to survive. And no matter how long it's been, it's never too late to tell your story. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if you're 75 years old and still learning how to breathe without flinching. Because telling your truth won't erase what happened, but it will remind you that you lived. And that's powerful. That's enough. That's everything. We live in a world where silence can feel safer than truth. But silence steals more than our voice. It steals our future. The hardest thing I ever did was tell the truth. The most healing thing I ever did was tell it again and again until I believed I was more than what had been done to me. No matter how broken your past feels, you can still build something beautiful on top of it. You are never too old to start again, to speak up, or to stand tall in your name. If Shirley's story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Have you ever carried a silence too long? Have you found your voice, or are you still searching for it? Leave a comment. Your words might be the light someone else is waiting to see. And if this story reminded you of the strength within you or someone you love, please subscribe to our channel. We share true stories of courage, survival, and healing because every voice matters, especially yours. Thank you for listening.